Billionaire couldn't perform for 5 years until he met this very black maid. The truth will make you cry. The 42nd floor of the coal industry's tower pierced Chicago's skyline like a glass dagger, and from his corner office, Darius Cole could see the entire city sprawled beneath him, a kingdom of steel and ambition that he had conquered before his 35th birthday. But tonight, as December snow painted the windows in crystalline fractals, he felt nothing but the familiar hollow ache that had become his closest companion. His fingers trembled as he loosened his Italian silk tie, the same tremor that had plagued him for 5 years, 3 months and 16 days. Not that he was counting. The Armani suit that cost more than most people's cars hung on his 6'3" frame like expensive armor, but it couldn't protect him from the war being waged inside his own body. Before we get deep into today's story, I really want to know where you are watching from across the world. Please, drop in the comment section where you're watching. Hit the subscribe button if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow, I have created something very special just for you, another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Once again, you're welcome to Mr. Paul's Stories, where we weave our dreams and hearts together through the magic of stories. Now, let's begin today's story. The penthouse office smelled of leather and bergamot, scents chosen by his interior designer to project power and sophistication. But underlying it all was something else, the sterile, clinical scent of loneliness that no amount of luxury could mask. Crystal decanters filled with amber whiskey caught the city lights, their contents untouched. He'd stopped drinking 3 years ago, after realizing that numbness wasn't a solution, just another prison. Darius pressed his palm against the floor-to-ceiling window, the cold seeping through the glass into his skin. 42 floors below, Chicago's evening rush moved like blood through arteries, people heading home to families, to lovers, to lives that felt real and warm and whole. He envied them with an intensity that sometimes scared him. Mr. Cole. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, professional and distant. Sarah had worked for him for 3 years and had never once seen him smile. The car is ready downstairs. He didn't answer immediately. In the reflection of the window, he studied his face. Sharp cheekbones inherited from his Ethiopian mother, deep-set hazel eyes from his Irish father, and skin the color of burnished bronze that had made him stand out in both the tech world's predominantly white spaces and his father's old-money social circles. Handsome, the magazines called him. One of Chicago's most eligible bachelors. If they only knew how broken the man behind that face truly was. The intercom buzzed again. Mr. Cole. Cancel the car, he said, his voice carrying the authority that had built empires and crushed competitors. I'm staying late. A pause. Sir, you have the charity gala at. Cancel everything. The words came out sharper than he intended, edged with a pain he couldn't quite hide. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah had learned not to push when his voice took on that particular tone. Yes, sir. Should I reschedule? Darius closed his eyes, his forehead still pressed against the window. The charity gala. Another evening of handshakes and hollow conversations, of women who saw his bank account before they saw him, of pretending to be the man everyone expected him to be. The thought made his chest tighten with familiar panic. No, he whispered, then cleared his throat and spoke louder. No rescheduling. Just go home, Sarah. Spend time with your family. The intercom went silent, and Darius was alone again with the ghosts that lived in the spaces between his heartbeats. He pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over Dr. Martinez's contact. 5 years of therapy, and still, the simple act of human touch felt like standing at the edge of an abyss. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened screen, successful, powerful, untouchable. Everything he'd worked so hard to become, and everything that now felt like a cage built from his own fears. The cleaning crew would arrive soon. They always came after 9, moving through the building like silent spirits, invisible to the people who worked here during the day. He'd seen them sometimes, catching glimpses of their shadowed figures in his peripheral vision, and had always felt a strange kinship with these people who existed in the margins of his world. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight felt like something was shifting in the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his life. Maybe it was the way the snow was falling, soft and forgiving against the harsh angles of the city. Maybe it was the exhaustion that had settled into his bones after another day of being someone he didn't recognize. Or maybe it was simply that after 5 years of running from himself, he was finally too tired to keep going. Darius sank into his leather chair, expensive and ergonomic and as cold as everything else in his life. In 3 hours, he would go home to his Lincoln Park mansion, walk through rooms filled with priceless art that he never really saw, and lie alone in a bed that felt like an ocean of silk and solitude. But for now, he would wait. Wait for the cleaning crew, wait for another day to end, wait for whatever came next in a life that felt suspended between who he used to be and who he was afraid he might never become again. The city lights blurred through the snow, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the faint sound of Christmas music drifting up from the streets below. It was December 15th, 10 days before a holiday he no longer celebrated, in a life he no longer recognized as his own. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that in exactly 43 minutes, everything would change. The elevator would ding softly on the 42nd floor, and someone would step into his carefully ordered world who would challenge every wall he'd built, every story he'd told himself about why he had to remain untouchable. Someone who would see past the billionaire, past the broken man, past all the careful armor he wore, and recognize something he'd forgotten existed, the heart that still beat underneath it all, waiting, against all hope, to feel again. 5 years ago, Darius Cole had been a different man entirely. He'd had a different laugh, full-throated and genuine, and a different way of moving through the world, as if he owned not just businesses but joy itself. That man had loved fearlessly, trusted completely, and believed that his wealth and success were gifts meant to be shared with someone special. That man had died on a rain-soaked night in October, in a penthouse bedroom that had since been gutted and rebuilt 3 times, though no amount of renovation could erase what had happened there. Now, Darius sat in his office chair as the memories crashed over him like they did every night around this time. Vivian's laugh echoing through rooms that had once felt like home. Her auburn hair spread across Egyptian cotton pillowcases that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The way she traced patterns on his chest in the early morning light, whispering about their future together, their wedding, their children, their life that had seemed so certain, so golden. The trust fund princess who'd seemed to love him for his mind first, his heart second, and his money. Well, he'd thought that came last. How naive he'd been. How beautifully, catastrophically naive. The betrayal hadn't been simple infidelity. That, he might have survived. Instead, Vivian had orchestrated something far more devastating, a long con that had involved his business partner Marcus, his own half-brother James, and a web of lies so intricate it had taken his lawyers 6 months to untangle. She'd played them all, using pillow talk and whispered secrets to nearly destroy everything Darius had built. But the real damage hadn't been financial. The real damage had been to something deeper, more fundamental. The night he'd found them together, all of them, celebrating what they thought would be his downfall, something inside him had broken so completely that no amount of therapy or time had been able to repair it. His body had shut down to protect his heart, and for 5 years, 3 months and 16 days, he'd been unable to feel anything close to desire, unable to trust his own instincts about people, unable to let anyone close enough to hurt him again. Dr. Martinez called it psychological erectile dysfunction rooted in trauma. Darius called it justice, his body finally matching the emptiness in his soul. The elevator dinged softly in the distance, and Darius straightened in his chair. The cleaning crew. Right on schedule, invisible and efficient, like everything else in his carefully controlled world. But tonight, the footsteps in the hallway sounded different. Lighter. More purposeful. And when someone knocked on his office door, actually knocked, instead of using a keycard like the regular cleaning staff, Darius felt something shift in his chest. "Come in," he called, his voice carefully neutral. The door opened, and the woman who stepped through changed everything. She was nothing like Vivian, nothing like any woman who'd ever moved through his social circles. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with rich, dark skin that seemed to glow under the office's recessed lighting. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the navy blue uniform of premium cleaning services, but she carried herself with a dignity that made the simple clothes look regal. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Deep brown, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by the opulence surrounding her. When she looked at him, he didn't see the calculating assessment he was used to from women, the quick evaluation of his net worth, his potential usefulness. Instead, he saw someone taking his measure as a human being, and finding him wanting. Mr. Cole. Her voice was warm honey over steel, with the faintest trace of a southern accent that spoke of places far from Chicago's Gold Coast. I'm Amara Washington. I'll be covering Maria's route while she's recovering from surgery. Darius found himself standing without conscious thought, an old-fashioned courtesy his mother had drilled into him surfacing despite his confusion. No one in his office had ever introduced themselves to him. The cleaning staff moved like ghosts, there and gone without acknowledgement. I didn't know Maria was having surgery. The words felt strange in his mouth. When was the last time he'd had a genuine conversation with someone who wasn't paid to tell him what he wanted to hear? Amara's expression softened slightly, and he caught a glimpse of genuine warmth underneath her professional reserve. Gallbladder surgery. She'll be fine, but she needs 6 weeks to recover. Don't worry, I know her routine. You won't even notice I'm here. But Darius was already noticing her. The way she moved with purposeful grace. The way her eyes swept the room with keen intelligence, cataloging and assessing not just the mess that needed cleaning, but the man who made it. The way she seemed to carry an invisible shield of self-respect that made her untouchable in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with strength. Have we met? He asked, though he knew they hadn't. He would have remembered her. A smile flickered at the corners of her mouth, not flirtatious, not calculating, but genuinely amused. No, Mr. Cole. We definitely haven't met. I'm not exactly in your usual circles. There was no bitterness in her tone, no resentment, just a statement of fact that somehow made him feel smaller than any insult could have. She turned toward his desk, already reaching for the cleaning supplies on her cart, and Darius caught a whiff of something unexpected, not the harsh chemical smell of industrial cleaners, but something warmer. Cocoa butter, maybe, and something floral that reminded him of his grandmother's garden. Wait, he said, surprising himself. You don't have to. I mean, I can step out if you need to clean. She paused, studying him with those discerning eyes. That's kind of you, but not necessary. I'm used to working around people. But instead of immediately beginning her work, she remained still, and Darius had the strangest sensation that she was seeing something in him that he'd forgotten existed. Not the billionaire, not the broken man, but something else entirely. Long day? She asked softly, and the simple question hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had asked him that? Really asked, not as a social pleasantry, but because they genuinely wanted to know? Every day is long, he said, the honesty surprising him. She nodded slowly, and in that nod was a recognition that made his chest tighten. She understood something about long days, about the weight of responsibility, about the way exhaustion could settle into your bones until it felt permanent. I know something about that, she said quietly, then seemed to catch herself. I should get started. I know you're busy. But Darius didn't feel busy. For the first time in years, he felt present, anchored in a moment that didn't feel like another scene in a play he was tired of performing. What happened to Maria? He asked, genuinely curious. Will she be okay? The surprise that flashed across Amara's face told him everything about how his employees, the invisible ones, were usually treated. But the surprise was quickly replaced by something warmer. She will be. Maria's tough. Tougher than she looks. She's been working 3 jobs to put her grandson through college, and she was trying to work through the pain until it got so bad she collapsed at her day job. Amara's hands stilled on her cleaning supplies. That's when I offered to take her night shift here. She needs the income, but she also needs to heal. 3 jobs, Darius repeated, the word sitting heavy in his mouth. He spent more on a single dinner than most people made in a month, and somehow he'd never really thought about the people who cleaned up after his excess. 3 jobs, Amara confirmed, but there was no judgment in her voice, just matter-of-fact acceptance of a reality he'd never had to face. Something twisted in Darius's chest, shame, maybe, or recognition. This woman, this stranger, was covering for a sick colleague out of pure human decency, while he sat in his tower counting the days since he'd last felt human touch. That's... He started, then stopped, not sure what word could possibly encompass the gap between their worlds. Life, Amara finished gently. For a lot of people, that's just life. She began moving then, cleaning with efficient, practiced movements that spoke of years of experience. But unlike the usual cleaning staff who worked around him like he wasn't there, she moved with a consciousness of his presence that wasn't uncomfortable, just aware. Darius found himself unable to look away. There was something mesmerizing about her competence, her quiet dignity, the way she treated his space with respect without being intimidated by it. When she reached for the crystal decanter on his desk, her fingers were gentle but sure, and he noticed that her nails were short and practical, no expensive manicure, but her hands moved with a grace that spoke of hidden depths. "You don't have to do this," he said suddenly. "Cover for Maria, I mean. That's generous of you." She looked up from polishing the glass, her eyes meeting his directly. "Maria covered for me when my mama was dying. When I had to take 3 weeks off to be with her, Maria worked my shifts and never said a word about being tired. That's what people do for each other." The simple words hit him like a revelation. That's what people do for each other. When was the last time he'd done something for someone without calculating what he might get in return? "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "About your mother." "Thank you." Her voice was soft, tinged with grief that had been worn smooth by time but never fully healed. She was a good woman. Strong. She would have liked Maria. In that moment, Darius saw something in Amara's face that he recognized with stunning clarity. The look of someone carrying the weight of other people's needs, someone who'd learned to be strong because the alternative was letting everyone down. He'd seen that look in the mirror once, before Vivian had taught him that strength could be used against him, that caring could be weaponized, that love could be the most dangerous vulnerability of all. But seeing it in Amara's face, he realized something he'd forgotten. Strength wasn't the absence of vulnerability. It was choosing to be vulnerable anyway, choosing to care anyway, choosing to show up anyway. "How long have you been with Premium Cleaning?" he asked, genuinely curious about this woman who'd walked into his office like a force of nature disguised as a cleaning lady. 6 months with the company, but I've been cleaning offices for 4 years. Before that, I was a social worker." She said it matter-of-factly, without shame or regret, just another piece of her story. A social worker. Darius leaned back in his chair, studying her with new eyes. That explained the quiet authority, the way she'd assessed him without judgment, the strength that seemed to radiate from her bones. "Child services," she clarified, wiping down his desk with methodical precision. "I loved it, but—" She paused, and for the first time since entering his office, her composure wavered slightly. "But love doesn't pay the bills when you're trying to keep your family together." There was a story there, one written in the careful way she didn't quite meet his eyes, in the slight tension that crept into her shoulders. Darius found himself wanting to know that story with an intensity that surprised him. "Your family," he repeated, the words a gentle question. She looked up then, and in her eyes was a fierceness that made him understand why she'd been able to walk into his office without intimidation. This was a woman who'd fought battles he couldn't imagine, who'd made sacrifices that would have broken lesser people. "My siblings," she said simply. "After Mama died, they needed someone to take care of them. Someone to make sure they stayed in school, stayed out of trouble, stayed together. The social work salary wasn't enough, so I found work that paid better." 3 words that held a universe of sacrifice. I found work. Not I had to give up my career, or I was forced to take cleaning jobs. Just a simple statement that somehow encompassed the death of dreams, the weight of responsibility, and the quiet heroism of choosing family over personal ambition. Darius felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed shut for 5 years. This woman, this stranger, had given up everything to take care of people she loved, while he'd spent half a decade nursing his wounds and building walls to keep the world out. "How many siblings?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been in years. 3. Tanya's 17, applying to colleges. Jamal's 15, thinks he wants to be a doctor. And Kenya's 12, convinced she's going to be the next Misty Copeland. Amara's face transformed when she talked about them, love and pride erasing the careful control she maintained everywhere else. "They sound remarkable," Darius said, and meant it. "They are." She finished cleaning his desk and moved to the windows, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "They're everything good in this world, and they deserve every chance I can give them." Watching her work, Darius felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine admiration for another human being. Not the kind of professional respect he held for business partners or the surface appreciation he felt for social acquaintances, but real, bone-deep respect for someone who'd faced impossible choices and found a way to do the right thing. "What about you?" he asked suddenly. "What do you deserve?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She stilled at the window, her cloth frozen mid-swipe, and when she turned to look at him, there was something vulnerable in her eyes that matched the crack in his chest. "I deserve to see them happy," she said quietly. "I deserve to know they're going to be okay. That's enough." But Darius heard what she didn't say, saw in her face the dream she'd set aside, the life she might have lived if circumstances had been different. And for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to offer something instead of protect what he had. "It shouldn't have to be," he said, the words surprising them both. Their eyes met across the space of his office, his world of luxury and isolation, her world of sacrifice and connection, and something passed between them that neither of them was ready to name. In that moment, Darius Cole, who hadn't felt desire or connection or hope in 5 years, 3 months, and 16 days, felt something stir to life. Not desire exactly, but something deeper. Recognition. The sense that this woman, this unexpected force who'd walked into his carefully controlled world, might be the key to a door he'd thought was locked forever. And Amara Washington, who'd spent 4 years focused solely on survival and responsibility, felt something she'd forgotten was possible. The awareness that maybe, just maybe, she deserved more than just seeing other people happy. Outside the windows, Chicago glittered in the December night, and somewhere in the distance, Christmas music played on. Neither of them noticed. They were too busy seeing each other, really seeing each other, for the first time. 3 weeks later, Darius found himself doing something he'd never done in 5 years of owning the building. He stayed late specifically to see the cleaning crew. Not the crew, if he was honest with himself. Her. Amara had been coming to his office every Tuesday and Thursday night, and somehow those had become the only 2 nights of the week that didn't feel like an endless march toward emptiness. She cleaned with the same quiet efficiency, but now they talked. Small conversations at first, the weather, how Maria's recovery was progressing, whether the Bulls had any hope this season. But gradually, the conversations had deepened, becoming the closest thing to friendship Darius had experienced since his world imploded. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, Amara seemed distracted, her usual serene composure cracked around the edges. She'd knocked and entered as always, but there was a tension in her shoulders that made Darius look up from his laptop with concern. "Everything okay?" he asked, studying her face in the soft office lighting. She paused in arranging her cleaning supplies, and for a moment, he thought she might deflect with her usual grace. Instead, she sank into the chair across from his desk, the first time she'd ever sat down in his presence. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I shouldn't. This is unprofessional." Amara. Her name felt natural on his tongue now, no longer strange or foreign. "What's wrong?" She looked up then, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten, the look of someone who'd been strong for so long that they'd forgotten how to ask for help. "Kenya's school called today," she said quietly. "She needs surgery. Her appendix. They caught it early, but—" Her voice broke slightly, and she pressed her lips together, fighting for control. Darius felt something shift inside him, a protective instinct he'd thought was buried with his ability to feel. "Is she okay? Where is she?" "Children's Memorial. Tanya's with her." Amara's hands twisted in her lap. "The surgery went well, but she has to stay for observation, and the bills." She stopped, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be telling you this. I needed to work tonight. I can't afford to miss a shift, not now." The words hit Darius like a physical blow. This woman, this incredible woman who'd spent weeks bringing light into his dark world, was sitting in his office worrying about money while her 12-year-old sister lay in a hospital bed. "How much?" he asked, the question out of his mouth before he could stop it. Amara's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. "I'm not asking for money. I know you're not. But I'm offering." He leaned forward, his voice gentle but determined. "How much are the medical bills?" "Mr. Cole." "Darius." The correction was automatic. Somewhere over the past 3 weeks, the formal distance had started to feel wrong. "Darius," she said, his name soft and uncertain on her lips. "I can't take money from you. That's not who I am." He stood then, moving around his desk to sit in the chair beside her instead of across from her, closing the distance that suddenly felt like an ocean. "I know exactly who you are, Amara. You're someone who gave up her career to take care of her family. Someone who covers extra shifts for sick colleagues. Someone who's been bringing light into a room that's been dark for 5 years." She stared at him, something shifting in her expression. 5 years. The question hung between them, loaded with implications he wasn't ready to explore. But looking at her, really looking at her, seeing the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide, the worry lines around her eyes, the way she held herself together through pure force of will, he found himself telling her things he'd never told anyone. 5 years since I felt human," he said quietly. 5 years since someone walked into my world and made me remember that there are good people in it. You did that, Amara. In 3 weeks, you've done what 5 years of therapy couldn't do." Her eyes searched his face, and he could see her processing his words, understanding dawning in her expression. What happened 5 years ago? It was a fair question, given what he'd just revealed, but Darius felt his old defenses rising. The story of Vivian, Marcus, and James was a wound that had never properly healed, a humiliation so deep he'd never spoken of it to anyone outside his legal team and therapist. But Amara had just trusted him with her fear, her vulnerability, her desperate worry for her sister. The least he could do was match her honesty with his own. "I was engaged," he said, the words rusty from disuse, "to a woman I thought loved me. Turns out she was working with my business partner and my half-brother to steal everything I'd built. They came very close to succeeding." Amara's intake of breath was sharp, pained. "Darius. The night I found out, the night I found them all together, celebrating what they thought was my downfall, something inside me broke." He looked down at his hands, remembering the tremor that had started that night and never stopped. I haven't been able to trust anyone since. Haven't been able to feel anything since." "Until now," she said softly, and it wasn't a question. He looked up, meeting her eyes, and felt that crack in his chest widen into something that might have been hope. "Until now." The silence stretched between them, charged with recognition and possibility, and something neither of them was quite ready to name. Outside, Chicago hummed with late-night energy, but inside his office, the world had narrowed to just the two of them and the truth that hung in the air like a bridge neither of them was sure they were brave enough to cross. "The medical bills," Amara said finally. "They're estimating around 15,000, with insurance covering most of it. But my deductible is high, and if Kenya needs additional treatment. Consider it done, Darius said immediately. I can't. Yes, you can. He reached out then, acting on an instinct he'd thought was dead, and covered her hands with his. The contact was electric, sending shock waves through his system that he hadn't felt in 5 years. But instead of the panic he expected, instead of the cold withdrawal that usually followed any attempt at physical connection, he felt warmth. Please, Amara. Let me do this. Let me help. She stared down at their joined hands, and he could see the war playing out in her expression, pride battling with desperation, independence fighting with a simple human need to accept help when it was offered with genuine care. Why? She whispered. The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. Why did he want to help her? Because she'd brought light into his darkness. Because she'd shown him kindness without expecting anything in return. Because she'd reminded him that there was still goodness in the world, still people worth caring about. But deeper than all of that was a truth he was only beginning to understand, because for the first time in 5 years, he felt like himself again when he was with her. Not the broken man, not the billionaire, just himself. Because you matter, he said simply. Because Kenya matters. Because what you've built, this family, this love, this sacrifice, it's beautiful, and it deserves to be protected. Tears gathered in her eyes then, the first crack in the armor she wore so carefully. I've been so scared, she whispered. So tired of being strong all the time. You don't have to be strong alone, he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Not anymore. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious and full of possibility. Then Amara's phone buzzed, shattering the spell. She pulled her hands away to check the message, and Darius immediately felt the loss of contact like a physical ache. It's Tanya, she said, relief flooding her voice. Kenya's asking for ice cream. That's a good sign. That's a very good sign, Darius agreed, smiling for what felt like the first time in years. What kind of ice cream? Strawberry. Always strawberry. Amara's face lit up when she talked about her sister, love transforming her features into something radiant. I'll make sure the hospital knows to keep strawberry ice cream stocked, Darius said, only half joking. Amara laughed then, the sound bright and genuine and absolutely devastating to his carefully constructed defenses. You can't just call hospitals and demand they stock specific ice cream flavors. Watch me, he said, pulling out his phone. I donate enough to Children's Memorial to have some influence over their cafeteria policies. Darius, you don't have to, she started, but he was already dialing. Yes, this is Darius Cole. I need to speak to someone about your ice cream selection. He caught Amara's eye and winked, the gesture so natural it surprised them both. She shook her head, but she was smiling, and that smile did something to his insides that felt dangerous and wonderful and absolutely terrifying. By the time he hung up the phone, strawberry ice cream had been added to the children's ward menu, and Amara was looking at him like he'd just performed a miracle. You're impossible, she said, but there was no heat in it, just wonder. I'm rich, he corrected. There's a difference. Being impossible would be if I'd convinced them to hire a full-time ice cream chef. Did you? I considered it. She laughed again, and the sound wrapped around his heart like a warm embrace. This, he realized, was what he'd been missing. Not just physical intimacy, but this connection, laughter, the simple joy of making someone else smile. I should go, Amara said reluctantly. Kenya will want to see me when visiting hours start in the morning, and I have a shift at the hotel before that. The mention of her other job reminded Darius of just how hard she worked, how much she carried on her shoulders. The hotel shift, the cleaning job, the responsibility for 3 teenagers. When did she sleep? When did she have time for herself? What hotel? He asked. The Palmer House. I clean rooms there from 6 to noon, then I have 3 hours before I need to pick up Kenya from school, well, usually. Then I come here. She was gathering her cleaning supplies as she talked, preparing to leave, But Darius felt a sudden desperate need to keep her there, to stretch out these moments where the world felt right again. "Amara," he said, standing as she prepared to go. "About the medical bills." "I'll pay you back," she said immediately. "It might take a while, but I'll pay back every penny." "That's not what I was going to say." He moved closer, close enough to catch that warm scent that always seemed to surround her, cocoa butter and something floral and indefinably her. "I was going to say that if you need anything else, anything at all, you call me. Day or night." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the exact moment she realized what was happening between them. The shift from gratitude to something deeper, something more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. "Darius," she said softly, his name a warning and a question and a prayer all at once. "I know," he said, understanding completely. "I know it's complicated. I know we're from different worlds. I know I'm your boss's client and you're you. But I also know that for the first time in 5 years, I feel alive when I'm with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and impossible to take back. Amara stared at him, conflict warring in her beautiful face, and Darius held his breath, waiting for her to run, waiting for her to remind him of all the reasons this could never work. Instead, she reached up and touched his cheek, the contact so gentle and unexpected that it sent electricity racing through his entire nervous system. "I feel it too," she whispered. "And it terrifies me." Before he could respond, before he could process the implications of her admission, she was gathering her things and heading for the door, leaving him standing in his office with his heart hammering and his skin still tingling from her touch. "Amara," he called after her. She paused at the door, not turning around. "Take tomorrow night off," he said. "Be with Kenya. Be with your family. The office will keep for one night." She nodded without turning around, and then she was gone, leaving Darius alone with the echoes of her admission and the revolutionary realization that for the first time in 5 years, he wanted something, someone, more than he feared the possibility of being hurt again. Outside his windows, Chicago stretched endlessly into the night, but Darius barely saw it. He was too busy replaying the feel of her hands in his, the sound of her laughter, the way she'd looked at him when she'd admitted feeling the same impossible, terrifying thing that was growing in his chest. Tomorrow, Kenya would ask for strawberry ice cream, and it would be there because he'd made a phone call. It was a small thing, insignificant in the grand scheme of the world, but it felt like everything. It felt like the first time in 5 years that his wealth, his power, his influence had been used for something that mattered. For someone who mattered. For a woman who'd walked into his office 3 weeks ago and started the slow, careful process of bringing him back to life. The inciting incident had occurred. The challenge had been presented, the decision made, the first real connection established. And though neither of them knew it yet, everything that happened next would be a direct result of this moment. This night when a billionaire learned to hope again and a cleaning lady discovered that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be cherished. The game had changed. The stakes had been raised. And in a children's hospital across town, a 12-year-old girl named Kenya was about to get all the strawberry ice cream she could eat, courtesy of a man who was falling in love with her sister. The next 2 weeks unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between two people who were learning each other's rhythms while pretending they weren't dancing at all. Kenya recovered beautifully, so beautifully that she was back to ballet practice within 10 days, twirling through the hospital corridors and charming every nurse on the pediatric floor. The strawberry ice cream had indeed been there when she asked for it, along with what she dramatically declared was the best hospital room ever after someone anonymously upgraded her to the VIP pediatric suite. Amara knew exactly who that someone was, just as she knew who had mysteriously arranged for her hotel shift to be covered while Kenya was hospitalized, and who had somehow influenced premium cleaning services to give her a raise that she definitely hadn't asked for. Darius Cole, she was learning, was incapable of small gestures. "You have to stop," she told him on the Thursday night she returned to his office, though her tone lacked any real conviction. He looked up from his laptop, and she caught that now familiar flutter in her chest at the way his eyes lit up when he saw her. Over the past month, She'd watched him transform from a hollow-eyed man who'd stood at his windows like a caged animal to someone who looked alive. The change was subtle but unmistakable, the way he carried himself, the genuine smiles that came more easily, the fact that he actually seemed to look forward to something. She was trying very hard not to think about the fact that the something appeared to be her. "Stop what?" he asked, though the slight curve of his mouth told her he knew exactly what she meant. "You know what. The room upgrade, the covered shifts, the mysterious raise." She set down her cleaning supplies but didn't start working, a routine they'd fallen into where actual cleaning became secondary to talking. "I can take care of myself." "I know you can," he said, standing and moving to the seating area near his windows. Another new routine, where he'd join her in the more comfortable chairs instead of staying behind his imposing desk. "That doesn't mean you should have to do everything alone." The words hit her in that soft spot she'd been trying to protect, the place that had grown tender under his unexpected kindness. For 4 years, she'd been the one everyone leaned on, the one who solved problems and made sacrifices and held everything together. Having someone want to take care of her, even in small ways, was both wonderful and terrifying. "People are going to talk," she said, settling into the chair across from him. It was easier to have these conversations when she wasn't looking directly at him, when she couldn't see the way his hazel eyes seemed to see right through every wall she'd built. "People are already talking." His voice was dry, but she caught the tension underneath. "Apparently, I've been seen smiling at work." Sarah asked if I was feeling all right. "Despite everything," Amara laughed. "That's terrible. A man smiling at his own company. Scandalous." "Completely unprecedented," he agreed, but then his expression grew more serious. "What kind of talk are you worried about, Amara?" The question made her stomach tighten. She'd been hoping to avoid this conversation, but she should have known that Darius, brilliant, perceptive Darius, wouldn't let her deflect forever. "You know what kind," she said quietly. "Rich white man, poor black cleaning lady. The assumptions people make about why you might be interested." The words hung between them, ugly and necessary. Because that was the reality they were dancing around, wasn't it? No matter how genuine their connection felt, no matter how much he'd helped her family, the world would see their story through the lens of every tired stereotype, every power imbalance, every cynical assumption about wealthy men and the women who worked for them. Darius was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight in a way that told her he was struggling with his own thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "And what do you think? About why I might be interested?" The question was fair, but it made her chest ache because the truth was, she did know why he was interested, and it had nothing to do with the crude assumptions people would make. She'd seen it in his eyes that first night, the recognition, the sense of meeting someone who understood something essential about the weight of responsibility and the price of strength. "I think," she said carefully, "that you see something in me that reminds you of who you used to be, before you got hurt. And I think," he said, leaning forward slightly, "that you're scared to believe I might see you for exactly who you are, brilliant, strong, beautiful, kind, and want you because of all of that, not in spite of it." The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were devastatingly accurate. When was the last time someone had called her brilliant? When was the last time someone had seen past the uniform, past the role she played as caretaker and provider, to the woman underneath? "Darius." She started, but he wasn't finished. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" He stood then, moving to his windows, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I see a woman who gave up her dream job to take care of her family and never once complained about it. I see someone who covers shifts for sick colleagues and thinks that's just what people do for each other. I see strength that comes from making impossible choices and somehow finding a way to keep loving anyway." Each word settled into her chest like a warm stone, building something she wasn't sure she was ready to name. "I see," he continued, turning back to face her, "the first person in 5 years who's made me remember that connection is possible. That trust is possible. That maybe I'm not as broken as I thought I was." The admission hung between them, raw and honest, and so vulnerable that Amara felt her own defenses cracking. This man, this powerful, complicated, generous man, was looking at her like she'd hung the moon, like she was the answer to questions he'd stopped asking years ago. "And what do you see when you look at me?" he asked softly. The question she'd been avoiding, the truth she'd been trying not to acknowledge even to herself. What did she see when she looked at Darius Cole? "I see someone who's been hurt so badly that he forgot how to hope," she said slowly, the words coming from some deep place she hadn't known existed. "I see kindness that he tries to hide behind efficiency, generosity that he disguises as business decisions. I see someone who's spent 5 years believing he's broken when really, he's just been waiting for the right person to remind him how to heal." They stared at each other across the space of his office, the city lights painting patterns on their faces, both of them balanced on the edge of something that felt too big to name and too important to walk away from. "This is crazy," Amara whispered. "Completely insane," he agreed. "I clean your office." "You do. You're worth more money than I can even comprehend." "Probably. People will say terrible things about both of us." "Without question. I have 3 teenagers depending on me." "I know. And I haven't dated anyone in 4 years because I haven't had time for anything but survival. I haven't been able to touch another person in 5 years because I was afraid they'd destroy me," he said quietly. "Until you." The admission stopped her cold. She'd known something had happened to him, known he carried wounds that ran deep, but hearing him say it so plainly, "I haven't been able to touch another person," made her heart clench with understanding. "Darius," she breathed. "I know it's a lot," he said quickly. "I know I come with baggage that would challenge anyone, and I know the last thing you need is someone else who needs taking care of. But Amara, what if we could take care of each other?" The question hung in the air like a bridge between their worlds, an invitation to step into something neither of them had planned, but both of them desperately wanted. Before she could second-guess herself, before she could think about all the reasons it was impossible, Amara stood and crossed the space between them. When she reached him, she did what she'd been wanting to do for weeks. She touched his face, her palm gentle against his cheek, and watched his eyes flutter closed at the contact. "When you touch me," he whispered, "it doesn't hurt. For the first time in 5 years, human contact doesn't terrify me." She felt the truth of it in the way he leaned into her touch, in the careful way his own hands came up to cover hers. This man who'd been afraid to be touched was holding her hand against his face like she was something precious, something healing. "When you look at me," she said softly, "I remember who I was before I became everyone's caretaker. I remember the woman who had dreams of her own." "You still have dreams," he said, opening his eyes to look at her. "They're just different now. Bigger. More important. What if they could include you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, the question she hadn't dared to ask herself. "What if they could include all of us?" he countered. "You, me, Tanya, Jamal, Kenya. What if we could build something together?" The picture he was painting was beautiful and terrifying, and everything she'd stopped letting herself want. A family that included her own happiness. A partner who saw her worth. A chance at love that didn't require her to sacrifice everything else she cared about. But even as her heart reached for the possibility, her practical mind was cataloging the obstacles. The difference in their backgrounds, their races, their social circles. The potential damage to her reputation, to her siblings' futures if she was seen as someone who traded her body for financial security. The very real possibility that this was just a wealthy man's fascination with someone different, someone who wouldn't last once the novelty wore off. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said. "Terrified, actually. But I'm more scared of walking away from this, from you, and spending the rest of my life wondering what if." Outside his windows, Chicago sprawled endlessly into the night, millions of people living their lives, making their choices, taking their risks. And here, 42 floors above it all, 2 people from different worlds were trying to figure out if love could bridge the gap between them. "If we do this," Amara said slowly, If we try this, it has to be real. Not some fantasy where you're saving me from my life, or where I'm healing you from your past. It has to be two people choosing each other, with all the complications that come with that choice. Real, he agreed. Messy, complicated, probably impossible some days, but real. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the billionaire or the broken man, but someone who was brave enough to hope again, someone who was willing to risk everything for the chance at connection. "Okay," she said, the word barely a whisper. "Okay. Okay, let's try. Let's see what this could be." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night, bright and warm and full of possibility. He pulled her closer, his hand settling on her waist, and she could feel the slight tremor in his fingers, not from fear this time but from hope. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and when his lips touched hers, it was like every cliché she'd ever rolled her eyes at suddenly made perfect sense. Fireworks and electricity and the feeling of coming home all at once. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was the answer to a prayer he'd been afraid to say, and she kissed him back like she was claiming something that had always been meant to be hers. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Darius rested his forehead against hers. "So what now?" he asked. "Now," Amara said, smiling up at him, "you tell me about yourself. Really tell me. And I'll tell you about my siblings, and we'll figure out how to make this work one day at a time." "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that very much." And as they settled back into the comfortable chairs, closer together this time, her hand in his, and began the careful process of learning each other's stories, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the building across the street, or the camera that captured the moment when Chicago's most eligible bachelor kissed his cleaning lady like she was the most important person in his world. By morning, the photo would be in the hands of someone who had every reason to destroy Darius Cole, and the real obstacles to their happiness were about to make themselves known. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of his office, with the city lights painting patterns on the walls and her laughter filling spaces that had been silent for too long, Darius and Amara existed in a bubble of possibility where love could conquer anything, and the future stretched out ahead of them bright with promise. The tension was rising. The obstacles were multiplying. And somewhere across town, a man named Marcus Chun, former business partner, co-conspirator in Darius's betrayal, and current owner of a significant grudge, was about to learn that his old friend had found something worth fighting for. The photograph arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Darius's office by courier at precisely 9:17 a.m. Sarah brought it in with his usual stack of contracts and correspondence, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant she was trying very hard not to react to something. "This came marked urgent and personal," she said, placing the manila envelope on his desk with the same care she might use handling a live grenade. Darius looked up from his laptop, noting the tension in her shoulders. In the 3 weeks since he'd started whatever this was with Amara, he'd been different at work, more present, more patient, occasionally even cheerful. Sarah had adapted to his improved mood with the cautious relief of someone who'd grown used to working for a ghost and was still adjusting to having a human being for a boss again. "No return address?" he asked, turning the envelope over in his hands. "None, sir." The courier said it was paid for in cash. That should have been his first warning. In his world, everything left paper trails, digital footprints, some way to track accountability. Anonymous deliveries were the stuff of espionage novels and paranoid fantasies, not legitimate business correspondence. He waited until Sarah left before opening it, some instinct telling him that whatever was inside required privacy. When he pulled out the contents, a single photograph and a handwritten note, his blood turned to ice water. The photograph was crystal clear, taken with professional equipment from across the street. It showed him and Amara in his office 3 nights ago, captured in the moment after their first kiss, her hand on his cheek, his eyes closed in what looked like bliss, both of them surrounded by the warm glow of his office lights. To anyone looking at it, they appeared to be exactly what they were, two people completely lost in each other. But the note that accompanied it transformed the beautiful moment into something ugly, something dangerous. Darius. Interesting choice in companionship. I'm sure the board of coal industries would find this fascinating, as would the media. After all, everyone loves a story about a billionaire and his cleaning lady. I wonder what they'd pay for the exclusive? Of course, certain parties might be willing to keep this private, for the right considerations. Shall we say $50 million? A small price for discretion. You have 48 hours to consider your options. A concerned friend. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the tone, the calculated cruelty, the intimate knowledge of exactly how to hurt him, that could only come from one source. Marcus Chen. His former business partner, co-architect of his betrayal with Vivian, and apparently not content with the fortune he'd already stolen. Darius set the photograph down with trembling fingers, the same tremor that had plagued him for 5 years suddenly worse than it had been in weeks. But this time, the shaking wasn't from trauma. It was from rage so pure and incandescent that it felt like it might burn him alive from the inside out. $50 million to keep quiet about the first happiness he'd found in half a decade. $50 million to protect not just his reputation, but Amara's, and by extension, her siblings' futures. Because Marcus was right about one thing, the media would have a field day with this story, and it wouldn't matter how genuine their connection was, how much they cared about each other. The narrative would write itself. Powerful white billionaire taking advantage of vulnerable black woman. Never mind that Amara was the strongest person he'd ever met. Never mind that she'd been the one to reach for him, to choose him, to risk everything for the possibility of what they might build together. The world would see what it wanted to see, and what it wanted to see would destroy them both. His phone buzzed with a text from Amara. Kenya's recital is tonight at 7. Would you like to come? The simple invitation hit him like a physical blow. Tonight was supposed to be the night he met her siblings officially, the night he stepped fully into her world and showed her that he was serious about building something real with her. Kenya had been practicing for weeks, Jamal was going to film it, and Tanya had grudgingly admitted she was actually kind of excited to meet the man who'd been making her sister smile so much lately. Now, staring at the photograph that reduced their beautiful moment to ammunition for blackmail, Darius felt the walls he'd spent 5 years building slam back into place. How could he sit in a school auditorium, watching a 12-year-old girl dance, knowing that his presence in their lives might destroy everything Amara had worked so hard to build? He called Dr. Martinez first, his therapist's familiar voice a lifeline in the chaos of his thoughts. "This feels like before," he said without preamble. "Like I'm being punished for caring about someone." "But it's not before, Darius," Dr. Martinez said calmly. "You're not the same man you were 5 years ago, and this isn't the same situation. Someone is trying to hurt you, yes, but the question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to pay him," Darius said immediately. $50 million is nothing compared to what this could cost Amara if it goes public. "Have you talked to her about this?" The question stopped him cold. Talk to Amara? Show her the photograph. Explain that their private moment had been turned into a weapon. Tell her that loving him came with a price tag of $50 million and a lifetime of looking over their shoulders? "I can't," he said. "She's been hurt enough. Her siblings have been through enough. I won't be the reason their lives get turned upside down." "So you're going to make decisions for her without consulting her. Just like." "Don't." The word came out sharp, cutting. "Don't compare this to Vivian. This is different." "Is it?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're about to let fear make your choices again. And this time, you're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting someone who cares about you." Dr. Martinez was right, and Darius hated him for it. But knowing something intellectually and being able to act on it emotionally were two different things entirely. The thought of Amara's face in the newspapers, of her siblings being followed by photographers, of her losing her job or being unable to find another one because she was known as the cleaning lady who seduced a billionaire, it made him physically sick. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Amara. "No pressure if you can't make it. I know work is crazy. But she's been practicing this routine for weeks, and she's so excited you might be there. The casual understanding in her message, the way she gave him an out while still letting him know he was wanted, it made the decision even harder. This was what he was protecting, this kindness, this family that had opened their arms to include him without asking for anything in return except that he show up and care about them the way they cared about him. He was still staring at his phone when Sarah knocked on his door. "Mr. Cole? Your 10 a.m. is here." "Cancel it," he said automatically. "Sir, it's the board meeting about the Morrison acquisition. They've been planning this for." "Cancel everything." He looked up at her, and something in his expression made her take a step back. "Everything, Sarah. Clear my schedule for the rest of the week." She nodded quickly and left, and Darius was alone again with the photograph and the impossible choice it represented. Pay the blackmail and spend the rest of his life waiting for the next demand, the next threat, the next person who wanted to profit from his attempt at happiness. Or refuse to pay and watch as the media circus destroyed not just him, but the woman he was falling in love with and the children who depended on her. There was a third option, of course. The option Dr. Martinez had been gently suggesting. Tell Amara everything and let her make her own choice about what risks she was willing to take for their relationship. But that required a kind of faith he wasn't sure he possessed anymore. Faith that someone could know the full cost of loving him and choose to pay it anyway. His phone rang, and Marcus Chen's name appeared on the screen. Of course. The man had never been able to resist gloating. "Marcus," Darius said, his voice deadly calm. "Darius. It's been too long. How are you enjoying your new hobby?" The deliberate pause, the casual cruelty in his tone, it was exactly what Darius had expected. Marcus had always been smooth, charming even, right up until the moment he slid the knife between your ribs. "What do you want?" Darius asked. "I think my note was quite clear. 50 million, and your touching little romance stays private. Though I have to say, I'm impressed. After Vivian, I thought you'd sworn off women entirely. This one must be very special. Leave her out of this." Marcus laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Oh, but she's the whole point, isn't she? After all, what good is leverage if it doesn't leverage the thing you care about most?" "You have 47 hours left," Darius said. "After that." "After that, what? You'll come after me? We both know you won't risk the publicity. You're too protective of your little cleaning lady for that." The casual way Marcus dismissed Amara, reduced her to a stereotype, an object to be used against him. It sent a flash of protective rage through Darius so intense that for a moment he couldn't speak. "You know what I find most interesting about all this?" Marcus continued conversationally. "It's that you're making the same mistake you made before. Falling for someone who's going to cost you everything. Amara is nothing like Vivian. Isn't she? Poor girl, working multiple jobs, struggling to support her family. Sounds like someone who might be very motivated to secure her future through creative means. Tell me, how much money have you given her already?" The implication hit Darius like a physical blow, not because there was any truth to it, but because he could already hear how it would sound in the media. The medical bills he'd paid, the raise he'd arranged, the hotel shifts he'd covered, every act of kindness would be twisted into evidence of a transactional relationship. "You're wrong," he said, but even he could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Am I? Well, we'll find out soon enough. After all, when this story breaks, she'll have plenty of opportunities to set the record straight. I'm sure she'll be very convincing on all the morning shows." The line went dead, and Darius stared at his phone, Marcus's words echoing in his head like poison. He knew that Amara hadn't asked for any of the help he'd given her, that she tried to refuse it, that her feelings for him had nothing to do with his money. But knowing something and being able to prove it to a skeptical world were very different things. His phone buzzed with another text, this one from Kenya. "Mr. Darius. Amara said you might come to my recital tonight. I'm doing a piece called Firebird, and I'm the lead. I can't wait for you to see it." The excitement in the 12-year-old's message, The innocent joy of a child who had no idea that the man she was inviting into her world might be the one to destroy it, nearly broke him. He looked at the photograph again, at the moment of perfect happiness frozen in time, and made a decision that felt like tearing his own heart out. He couldn't go to the recital. He couldn't risk being seen with them, couldn't chance a photographer following him there, couldn't bear the thought of Kenya's face in a tabloid because he'd been selfish enough to want a family. With shaking fingers, he typed back, "Something came up at work. I'm sorry, Kenya. I know you'll be amazing." The response came back almost immediately, "That's okay. Amara said you're really important and have to work a lot. Maybe next time." Next time. As if there would be a next time. As if he hadn't just made the choice to walk away from the best thing that had ever happened to him in order to protect it from his own toxic presence. He deleted Amara's contact information from his phone before he could change his mind, then called building security to add new restrictions to his floor. No cleaning staff after 6 p.m. No exceptions. It wasn't until he was locking the photograph in his office safe, evidence of his own stupidity, insurance against his own weakness, that he realized what he'd done. In trying to protect Amara from the consequences of loving him, he'd made the same mistake he'd accused everyone else of making. He decided what was best for her without giving her a choice in the matter. But it was too late now. By tonight, when she realized he wasn't coming to the recital, when his calls went unanswered and his office remained empty during her cleaning rounds, she would understand that whatever they'd had was over. She would hate him for it, eventually. But she would be safe. Her siblings would be safe. Their lives could go back to normal, unmarked by the scandal that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Outside his windows, Chicago hummed with afternoon energy, millions of people going about their lives, making their choices, fighting their battles. And 42 floors above it all, a man who had just found the courage to love again was systematically destroying that love in the name of protecting it. The midpoint revelation had occurred. Everything had shifted, just as Dr. Martinez would have predicted. But instead of the truth setting him free, Darius had let it become another prison, and this time he'd locked himself in willingly. Somewhere across town, a woman named Amara Washington was getting ready for her sister's recital, saving an empty seat beside her for a man who had promised to show up and care about them, not knowing that he was keeping that promise in the cruelest way possible. The stakes had never been higher. The obstacles had never been more insurmountable. And the man who had spent 5 years learning to hope again was about to discover what it meant to lose everything twice. Have you ever tried to protect someone you loved by pushing them away? Sometimes our deepest acts of love can look like betrayal to the people we're trying to save. What would you do if loving someone meant putting them at risk? Share your thoughts. Because sometimes the hardest choice isn't between love and loss, but between different ways of loving. The empty seat at Kenya's recital told Amara everything she needed to know. She sat in the packed auditorium of Lincoln Elementary, surrounded by proud parents and excited siblings, staring at the space where Darius was supposed to be. The program crinkled in her hands as she gripped it too tightly, Kenya's name printed in bold letters under featured dancer the Firebird Suite. "Where's Mr. Darius?" Jamal asked, leaning over from her left side. At 15, he was all sharp elbows and suspicious glances, but he'd been genuinely excited about meeting the man who'd been making his sister smile again. "Work emergency," Amara said, the lie bitter on her tongue. She'd been telling herself the same thing for the past hour, trying to ignore the sick feeling in her stomach that said this was about more than a last-minute meeting. Tanya, 17 and perceptive in the way that came from growing up too fast, caught her eye across Jamal. "Did he call?" "Text," Amara said shortly, not wanting to explain how brief and cold his message had been. Nothing like the warm, genuine texts they'd been exchanging for weeks. The lights dimmed, and Kenya appeared on stage in her costume, a brilliant red and gold creation that made her look like actual fire given human form. Despite everything, Amara felt her heart swell with pride. Her baby sister was magnificent, all grace and power and joy as she moved across the stage. But even as she watched Kenya dance with the passion of someone who'd found their calling, part of Amara's mind was cataloging the wrongness of the past 24 hours. Darius's sudden distance. The way he'd avoided her eyes during their brief phone conversation about the recital. The feeling that he was pulling away just when they'd started to build something real. When the performance ended and Kenya took her bows, radiant with accomplishment, Amara plastered on a smile and cheered with everyone else. But inside, a cold certainty was settling into her bones. Something had changed, and she was about to lose the first thing that had felt like hope in 4 years. She was amazing, Tanya said as they waited in the lobby for Kenya to change out of her costume. Did you see that leap in the second movement? Jamal added, his usual teenage coolness forgotten in genuine enthusiasm. That was like professional-level stuff. Mr. Darius is going to be so sorry he missed it, Kenya announced, appearing beside them still glowing with post-performance adrenaline. Can we call him? I want to tell him about the standing ovation. The eager hope in her sister's voice made Amara's chest tighten. It's late, baby. He's probably still working. But he said he wanted to hear about it, Kenya insisted. And I practiced so hard because I knew he was coming. The disappointment creeping into Kenya's voice was like a knife to Amara's heart. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, letting her siblings get attached to someone who might disappear from their lives as suddenly as he'd appeared. We'll call him tomorrow, she promised, knowing even as she said it that something fundamental had shifted, that tomorrow Darius might be as unreachable as he'd been tonight. The ride home was filled with Kenya's chatter about the performance, Jamal's plans to edit the video he'd filmed, and Tanya's questions about college applications. Normal family noise that usually grounded Amara, but tonight only emphasized the hollow ache growing in her chest. It wasn't until after the kids were in bed that she allowed herself to really examine the texts Darius had sent. The excuse about work was plausible. She knew how demanding his schedule was. But there was something in the tone, the careful distance, that felt like a goodbye disguised as a postponement. She tried calling him. The phone rang once, then went straight to voicemail, which meant he'd actively declined the call. Her heart sank further. Darius, it's me, she said to his voicemail, trying to keep her voice steady. Kenya was incredible tonight. I know you would have loved it. Call me when you get this, okay? I want to make sure you're all right. He didn't call back. The next day at the Palmer house, she moved through her cleaning routine like a robot, her mind cycling through every conversation she and Darius had shared, looking for clues about what had gone wrong. Had she misread the signals? Had she pushed too hard, too fast? Had he realized what she'd known from the beginning, that they were from different worlds, and crossing between them came with costs neither of them had fully calculated? You look like hell, Maria observed when they crossed paths in the supply closet. The older woman was back on light duty, still recovering from her surgery but insistent on returning to work. Thanks for the pep talk, Amara said dryly. I'm serious, Mija. What's wrong? Maria had been cleaning office buildings for 20 years and had seen everything from embezzlement scandals to executive nervous breakdowns. She had a particular talent for reading people's pain, probably because she'd survived plenty of her own. Man trouble, Amara said simply. The one from the coal building? The one who paid my medical bills. Amara's head snapped up. He what? Maria looked confused. You didn't know? Someone anonymous covered my entire surgery cost, right down to the premium room upgrade. The hospital said it was paid in full by a benefactor who wanted to remain nameless, but... She shrugged. There aren't many people with that kind of money who even know I exist. The revelation hit Amara like a physical blow. Darius had been helping people in her life even when she wasn't looking, even when he got no credit for it. The man who'd been pulling away from her had quietly made sure that Maria, a woman he'd never met, didn't have to choose between her health and her family's financial security. He's a good man, Maria said gently. Whatever's wrong, it's probably not what you think it is. But knowing Darius was good only made his disappearance more painful. Good men didn't vanish without explanation. Good men didn't ignore calls from women they'd been kissing 3 days earlier. Unless Unless something had happened. Unless someone had threatened him, or her, or... Amara's blood ran cold as another possibility occurred to her. What if this wasn't about them at all? What if someone had found out about their relationship and was using it against him? The thought sent her into a spiral of anxiety that lasted the rest of her shift. By the time she made it to Coal Industries that evening, she was wound tight with worry and determination. Whatever was happening, whatever had made Darius retreat behind his walls again, she was going to find out. But when she reached the 42nd floor, her keycard didn't work. She tried it twice, 3 times, before the reality sank in. Her access had been revoked. Darius had locked her out, literally and figuratively. "Excuse me." She approached the security guard making his rounds, her voice carefully professional. "I'm with Premium Cleaning Services. There seems to be an issue with my keycard." The guard, young, earnest, clearly uncomfortable, checked his tablet. "Ma'am, I have a note here that cleaning services for the executive floor have been suspended temporarily." Suspended? For how long? The note just says temporarily. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't have any other information." Amara stood in the hallway for a full minute, staring at the doors that had become a second home to her over the past month. Behind those doors was the man who'd made her remember what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, to be cherished for who she was instead of what she could provide for everyone else. Behind those doors was also, apparently, a coward. The anger that rose in her chest was clean and fierce and entirely justified. She'd given him her trust, let him meet her family, allowed her siblings to care about him. And when things got complicated, because of course they would get complicated, she'd warned him about that from the beginning. He'd chosen the easy way out. She took the elevator down to the lobby and called Premium Cleaning Services. "This is Amara Washington. I need to speak to Mr. Rodriguez about my assignment at Coal Industries." "Hold, please." 5 minutes of hold music later, her supervisor came on the line. "Amara, I was going to call you tomorrow. We've had a request to reassign you from the coal building." "A request from who?" "The client. Something about wanting consistency in their cleaning staff. They're requesting someone with more experience on executive floors." The dismissal was professional, careful, and completely devastating. Not only was Darius avoiding her personally, he was having her removed from the building entirely. "I understand," she said, proud that her voice stayed steady. "Where would you like me to work instead?" "We've got an opening at the medical center on Michigan Avenue. Night shift, same hours. Can you start Monday?" "Of course." She hung up and sat in her car in the Coal Industries parking garage for 20 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. In less than a week, she'd gone from falling in love to being completely shut out, with no explanation beyond a canceled recital appearance and a sudden reassignment at work. The rational part of her mind said she should be grateful. Getting involved with a client, especially one like Darius, had been professionally risky from the beginning. This clean break, this clear boundary, was probably for the best. But the part of her that had started to hope, started to dream about a future that included more than just survival, felt like it was dying. When she got home, Tanya was waiting in the kitchen with homework spread across the table and a concerned expression on her face. "Kenya keeps asking when Mr. Darius is coming to dinner," Tanya said without preamble. "And Jamal wants to show him some coding project he's been working on. What should I tell them?" The question hung in the air like a judgment. Amara had let her siblings get attached to a man who disappeared at the first sign of real complications. She'd put their emotional well-being at risk for her own selfish desire to be happy. "Tell them he's not coming," she said quietly. "Tell them he's very busy with work and we shouldn't count on seeing him again." Tanya's face crumpled with understanding. At 17, she'd learned to read between the lines of adult disappointments. "Amara, I'm sorry." "Don't be." It was always a long shot. Amara forced a smile. "We're fine on our own. We've always been fine on our own." But as she said it, she realized how much she'd started to believe that maybe they didn't have to be on their own anymore. Maybe there could be someone who wanted to share the load, who saw value in their little family, who thought she deserved to be loved for who she was instead of what she could provide. She'd been wrong. And the price of being wrong was sitting at her kitchen table, trying to figure out how to explain to a 12-year-old girl that the man who'd made her feel special had decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Over the next few days, Amara threw herself into the routine that had sustained her for 4 years: work, family, survival. The new assignment at the medical center was fine, impersonal, efficient, exactly what cleaning work should be. No friendly conversations, no shared moments, no dangerous hope that this could be anything more than a paycheck. But even as she tried to convince herself that going back to normal was a relief, her phone stayed close at hand, waiting for a call that never came. Her heart jumped every time someone knocked at the door. She found herself looking for familiar faces in crowds, hoping against hope that Darius would appear with an explanation that made sense of his disappearance. Kenya stopped asking about him after the 3rd day. Jamal deleted the video he'd made for him. Tanya stopped mentioning college plans that had briefly included conversations about mentorship and opportunities. And Amara learned what it meant to grieve for a future that had never really existed, to mourn the loss of hope itself. On Friday night, exactly 1 week after the recital that had changed everything, she was folding laundry when Tanya appeared in her doorway. "I did something," her sister announced, her chin raised in that stubborn way that meant she'd made a decision and wouldn't be talked out of it. "What kind of something?" "I went to Coal Industries today." Amara's heart stopped. "Tanya, you didn't." "I did. I waited outside until he came out for lunch, and I followed him." "You followed him?" Amara's voice rose an octave. "Tanya Michelle Washington, that's what people do when someone hurts their family," Tanya interrupted. "I wanted to see what was so important that he couldn't even call to explain why he disappeared." Despite her horror at her sister's methods, Amara found herself desperate to know what Tanya had discovered. "And he looks terrible, Amara. Like, really terrible. Thin, exhausted, like he hasn't slept in days. And he keeps looking over his shoulder, like he's afraid of something." The description sent a chill down Amara's spine. Fear. That was what Tanya had seen. Not indifference, not the relief of a man who'd escaped an inconvenient entanglement, but fear. "There's something else," Tanya continued. "I saw him throw away a photo in the coffee shop. I waited until he left and got it out of the trash." She pulled a crumpled photograph from her pocket, and Amara's world tilted on its axis. It was them. Her and Darius in his office, captured in the moment after their first kiss. The image was intimate, beautiful, and completely private, or it should have been. "Someone was watching you," Tanya said quietly. "Someone took this picture and gave it to him. That's why he ran." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The sudden distance, the canceled plans, the locked doors and reassigned work schedules. Darius hadn't abandoned her because he'd gotten bored or realized she wasn't worth the complications. He'd been threatened. And rather than fight, rather than trust her with the truth, he'd chosen to protect her the only way he knew how, by walking away. "That idiot," she breathed, anger and relief and love crashing together in her chest. "That noble, self-sacrificing idiot." "So what are we going to do about it?" Tanya asked. "We." Amara looked at her sister, seeing not the 17-year-old girl who still needed taking care of, but the young woman who was ready to fight for the people she loved. "We," Tanya confirmed. "He made Kenya happy. He made you happy. And someone's trying to use that against all of us. So what are we going to do about it?" For the first time in a week, Amara smiled. A real smile, fierce and determined and full of the kind of hope that refused to stay buried. "We're going to remind him," she said, "that some things are worth fighting for." Outside, Chicago glittered in the November night, full of obstacles and opportunities in equal measure. And in a small apartment on the south side, A woman who'd spent 4 years believing she had to face the world alone was remembering that sometimes, love meant refusing to let someone sacrifice themselves for your protection. The darkest hour was upon them. But in the space between despair and dawn, hope was gathering its strength for one final stand. Saturday morning found Amara standing outside Coal Industries at 7 a.m., the crumpled photograph in her purse and a determination in her chest that felt like steel wrapped in silk. She'd spent the entire night planning, researching, and preparing for what might be the most important conversation of her life. Tanya had wanted to come with her, but Amara had drawn the line at bringing her teenage sister into what was essentially corporate warfare. This was her fight now, her choice to make, and she was going to make it on her own terms. She knew Darius's schedule. He always arrived early on Saturdays when the building was quiet, claiming it was the only time he could think clearly. Today, she was counting on that predictability. The security guard at the front desk looked up in surprise as she approached. "Ma'am, the building isn't officially open for." "I'm here to see Darius Cole," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made the guard pause. "Tell him Amara Washington is here, and that I have something that belongs to him." The guard looked uncertain, but something in her demeanor convinced him to make the call. After a brief conversation in which she could hear Darius's voice through the receiver, sharp, panicked, definitely trying to have her turned away, the guard hung up. "He says he's not available." "Tell him," Amara said calmly, "that I have a photograph he might be interested in discussing, and that I'm not leaving until we talk." Another call. This time, the conversation was longer, more heated. When the guard hung up, he looked resigned. 42nd floor. "He'll meet you in the lobby area." The elevator ride up felt like ascending toward either salvation or destruction. Amara had no idea which it would be, but she knew she couldn't live with herself if she didn't try. The doors opened, and there he was. Tanya had been right. He looked terrible. His usually impeccable appearance was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and there was a hollowness to his cheeks that spoke of missed meals and sleepless nights. But it was the look in his eyes that nearly broke her resolve, pure, desperate fear. Not fear of her, she realized. Fear for her. "You shouldn't be here," he said immediately, not moving from his position near the elevators. Even now, even in his obvious distress, he was maintaining distance to protect her. "And you shouldn't be making decisions about my life without consulting me," she replied, pulling the photograph from her purse and holding it up. "We need to talk." His face went pale as he saw the image. "Where did you get that?" "You threw it away." Tanya fished it out of a coffee shop trash can because she was worried about why you disappeared from our lives without explanation. Amara stepped closer, watching him flinch away from her proximity. "Someone's been watching us. Someone took this picture and is using it to threaten you. And instead of telling me, instead of trusting me, you decided to handle it alone." "I was protecting you." "You were protecting yourself," she cut him off, her voice sharp with accumulated hurt and frustration. "You were protecting yourself from having to trust someone else with your problems. From having to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'm strong enough to face whatever consequences come from loving you." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Darius stared at her, something shifting in his expression, surprise maybe, that she'd used the word love so directly, so unflinchingly. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "If this goes public, if people see this photograph and start digging into our relationship, it won't just hurt me. It'll destroy you, your siblings, everything you've worked for. They'll say you're a gold digger, that you seduced me for money, that. So let them say it." Her voice was steady, implacable. "Let them say whatever they want. I know who I am, Darius. More importantly, you know who I am. And if you're willing to throw away what we have because you're afraid of other people's opinions, then maybe you don't know me as well as I thought." He stared at her, clearly struggling with her response. In his world, reputation was currency, scandal was destruction. The idea that someone would willingly face public judgment for love probably seemed incomprehensible. The blackmail demand, she continued, watching his face for confirmation. How much are they asking for? His jaw tightened. It doesn't matter. It does matter. Because whatever they're asking for, they're going to ask for more. And more after that. You know this, Darius. You're too smart to believe that paying once will make this go away. She could see him processing her words, see the moment he realized she was right. Blackmailers never stopped with one payment. $50 million, he said finally. They want $50 million, and they'll keep the photograph private. The number hit her like a physical blow. $50 million. More money than she could comprehend. More than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. And someone wanted that amount to keep their private moment from becoming public. Who is it? She asked. Who's doing this to us? Marcus Chun. My former business partner. He was part of what happened 5 years ago. The betrayal you told me about. She moved closer, noting how he didn't retreat this time. He helped your fiancé try to destroy you. Yes. And now he wants to finish the job by destroying the first good thing that's happened to me since. The pain in his voice, the raw vulnerability he was finally allowing her to see, made her heart clench. This was what she'd been fighting for, not just their relationship, but his right to hope, to heal, to believe that his past didn't have to define his future. Then we stop him, she said simply. Amara, you don't understand what you're saying. This isn't some problem we can solve together. This is a man trying to profit from our happiness, she interrupted. This is someone who thinks he can scare us apart because he's counting on us being too afraid to fight back. Well, I have news for Marcus Chun. I've been fighting my whole life, and I'm not about to stop now. The transformation in Darius's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The fear was still there, but underneath it, she could see something else emerging, hope. Tentative, fragile, but real. What are you proposing? He asked. I'm proposing we call his bluff. We go public on our own terms, tell our own story, before he can spin it his way. She reached for his hands, relieved when he didn't pull away. We control the narrative instead of letting him control it. The media will be brutal, he warned. They'll dig into everything, your past, your family, your finances. They'll ask questions about every dollar I've spent on you, every favor I've done. It won't be pretty. I know. Her voice was steady, certain. But you know what? Let them dig. Let them ask their questions. Because when they're done investigating, they'll find exactly what we know they'll find. Two people who found each other in the middle of their separate struggles and decided they were stronger together than apart. She could see him wavering, could see the part of him that wanted to believe her fighting with the part that was terrified of causing her pain. My siblings, she continued. They'll be affected too. Photographed followed, asked questions about their sister who seduced a billionaire. Are you prepared for that? Are you? He countered. I've spent 4 years teaching them that we don't run from challenges, we face them. That we don't let other people define our worth or our choices. If I let Marcus Chun scare me away from you, what does that teach them about standing up for what matters? The question hung between them, and Amara could see the exact moment Darius understood what she was really saying. This wasn't just about their relationship anymore. It was about the example she set for Tanya, Jamal, and Kenya. It was about showing them that love was worth fighting for, that happiness wasn't something you had to apologize for or hide from. There's something else, she said, reaching into her purse again. This time, she pulled out her phone, already recording. Marcus Chun made one critical mistake. What's that? He's been watching us, photographing us, stalking us for weeks without our knowledge or consent. That's not just unethical. In Illinois, it's illegal. Darius's eyebrows rose. Stalking charges. At minimum. Harassment, invasion of privacy, potentially criminal intimidation depending on how he delivered his blackmail demand. Amara's smile was sharp, predatory. You see, Mr. Chun made the mistake of trying to intimidate someone who used to work in social services. I know exactly what constitutes criminal behavior, and I know exactly which authorities to contact. For the first time since she'd arrived, Darius smiled. Really smiled, the expression transforming his haggard features into something that looked like the man she'd fallen in love with. You want to have him arrested. I want to have him prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And while the police are building their case, I want us to tell the world exactly what kind of man Marcus Chin is and exactly what he tried to do to us. The plan was audacious, risky, and completely dependent on their ability to control a story that could easily spiral out of control. But looking at Darius, seeing the way hope was slowly replacing fear in his expression, Amara knew it was their only real choice. The photograph, he said slowly. Even if we go public first, it's still intimate, private. Are you really prepared to have that image in newspapers, on websites? She looked down at the crumpled photo in her hands. Their first kiss, captured in a moment of perfect vulnerability and connection. To her, it was beautiful. To the world, it would be evidence, ammunition, a symbol of whatever story they chose to tell about it. I'm prepared, she said firmly. Because that photograph shows two people who found each other despite impossible odds. Two people who were brave enough to risk everything for love. If that's the image the world sees when they look at us, then I can live with that. Darius stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing everything. The risks, the potential consequences, the possibility that this could all go horribly wrong. But she could also see him recognizing something else, the possibility that it could go right. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no going back. Once we make this public, once we involve the authorities, we're committed to seeing it through no matter what happens. I know. And if it all falls apart, if the story gets twisted or the investigation doesn't go our way, then we'll face that together too. She stepped closer, close enough to touch his face, to feel the slight tremor in his jaw that told her he was still afraid. Darius, for 5 years you've been letting fear make your decisions. And for 4 years, I've been so focused on survival that I forgot I deserved to live, not just exist. Maybe it's time we both stopped being afraid of what we might lose and started fighting for what we want to keep. The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility and terror in equal measure. Outside the windows, Chicago spread out beneath them like a promise. Millions of people living their lives, taking their risks, choosing love over fear every single day. Okay, he said finally, the word barely a whisper. Okay. Okay, let's do it. Let's fight back. The smile that spread across Amara's face was like sunrise after the longest night. She reached for his hands, and this time he met her halfway, their fingers interlacing like they'd never been apart. So what's our first move? He asked. First, we call the police and file stalking and harassment charges against Marcus Chun. Then, while they're processing that, we call a press conference and tell our story our way. She paused, studying his face. But before we do any of that, there's something I need to know. What's that? Are you doing this because you love me, or because you're angry at Marcus? The question was direct, unflinching, and absolutely necessary. Because if they were going to face the storm together, she needed to know that he was choosing her, not just choosing revenge. Both, he said honestly. I love you enough to want to protect you, and I'm angry enough at Marcus to want to destroy him for threatening what we have. Is that wrong? No, she said, reaching up to touch his cheek. That's human. That's real. That's what I needed to hear. She stood on her toes and kissed him then, soft and sure and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and the fear in his eyes had been replaced by something much more dangerous, determination. Marcus Chun has no idea what he started, Darius said, his voice low and certain. No, Amara agreed, he really doesn't. Outside, Chicago hummed with Saturday morning energy, unaware that two people 42 floors above the street were about to change everything. The final push had begun, the die cast, the battle lines drawn. By Monday morning, Marcus Chun would discover that blackmailing Darius Cole had been a tactical error. But blackmailing the woman Darius Cole loved, a woman who'd spent 4 years fighting impossible odds and refusing to back down, had been a catastrophic mistake. The war was about to begin, and this time, love was going to fight back. Monday morning arrived gray and bitter, with November wind cutting through Chicago's streets like a promise of the winter to come. But inside the law offices of Peterson, Klein and Associates, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation and barely controlled rage. Detective Maria Santos of the Chicago Police Department sat across from Darius and Amara, her weathered face impassive as she reviewed the evidence they'd compiled over the weekend. The stalking photos, not just the one of their kiss, but dozens of others Marcus had apparently been taking for weeks. The blackmail note with its handwritten threats. The timeline of harassment that painted a clear picture of escalating criminal behavior. "This is substantial," Detective Santos said finally, looking up from the file. "Stalking in the first degree, criminal harassment, extortion. Mr. Chun is looking at serious jail time if convicted." "How serious?" Darius asked, his voice carefully controlled. "With his prior record, and yes, we found priors for financial fraud, he's looking at 5 to 10 years minimum." Amara felt a grim satisfaction at the detective's words. Marcus Chun had made the mistake of thinking he was untouchable, that his wealth and connections put him above consequences. He was about to learn otherwise. "There's one complication," Detective Santos continued. "Chen's disappeared. His penthouse is empty, his office cleared out, no forwarding address. We have APBs out, but he could be anywhere by now." "He ran," Darius said, not sounding surprised. "Smart move, actually. If he'd stayed, we'd have arrested him this morning. This way, he buys himself time to try to negotiate or cover his tracks." But Detective Santos didn't know Marcus the way Darius did. Marcus wasn't the type to run and hide indefinitely. He was the type to make one last desperate play, one final attempt to salvage victory from the jaws of defeat. "He'll surface," Darius said with certainty. "Marcus has too big an ego to just disappear. He'll want to have the last word." As if summoned by his words, Amara's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Turn on Channel 7. Now." They found a television in the law firm's conference room, and what they saw made Amara's blood run cold. Marcus Chun, polished and smiling, sat across from Chicago's most aggressive investigative reporter in what was clearly a live broadcast. "Explosive allegations about one of Chicago's most prominent billionaires," the reporter was saying. "You claim to have evidence that Darius Cole has been engaging in inappropriate relationships with his building service staff?" Marcus's smile was smooth, practiced, designed to suggest reluctant honesty. "I hate to be the one to bring this forward, but I have a responsibility to protect vulnerable workers from exploitation. The photographs I've obtained show a clear pattern of Mr. Cole using his position of power to coerce intimate relationships with women who depend on his company for their livelihoods." Amara felt Darius stiffen beside her as Marcus pulled out not just their photograph, but others, images that had been doctored, manipulated to suggest a pattern of predatory behavior that didn't exist. "This is character assassination," Detective Santos muttered. "He's trying to destroy your reputation before we can arrest him." But Amara was already moving, her phone in her hand, her mind working at lightning speed. Marcus had made another crucial mistake. He was doing this live, in real time, with no script and no legal protection. "Get me Channel 7, she told Darius. "Right now." "Amara, what are you?" "Trust me." She grabbed his hand, squeezing tight. "We planned for this, remember? It's time to fight back." 5 minutes later, they were in the back of Darius's car, racing toward the television station while Amara spoke rapidly into her phone. "This is Amara Washington. I'm the woman in the photographs your guest is discussing, and I'm calling to request equal time to respond to his allegations. Yes, I'll hold. Darius stared at her in amazement as she calmly negotiated what amounted to a live television ambush. This was Amara at her most formidable, strategic, fearless, absolutely certain of her ground. They'll give us 10 minutes after Marcus finishes his segment, she reported. Live, unedited, no questions screened in advance. Are you sure about this? She looked at him, and in her eyes was the same fierce determination that had carried her through 4 years of impossible choices and countless small battles. Darius, I've been preparing for this fight my whole life. I just didn't know it until now. 20 minutes later, they sat in the same studio chairs Marcus had just vacated, facing the same reporter who'd been so eager to broadcast his allegations. But the dynamic had shifted completely, and Amara could see the reporter's discomfort as she realized she might have been played. We're here with Darius Cole and Amara Washington, the reporter began, to respond to some serious allegations made earlier this morning. Ms. Washington, you claim that the photographs shown earlier were taken without your knowledge or consent. That's correct, Amara said, her voice steady and clear. What Marcus Chin didn't tell your viewers is that he's been stalking Mr. Cole and me for weeks, taking photographs of private moments and using them to extort money. What he also didn't mention is that there's currently a warrant out for his arrest on charges of criminal stalking, harassment, and extortion. The reporter's eyebrows shot up. A warrant. Issued this morning by Judge Catherine Morris of the Cook County Circuit Court, Darius confirmed, sliding a copy of the paperwork across the table. Mr. Chun is a fugitive from justice who chose to come on your show rather than turn himself in to face the charges against him. But the photographs show 2 consenting adults in a private moment, Amara interrupted. A moment that was photographed illegally and is now being used to try to destroy our reputations and our relationship. Mr. Chun demanded $50 million to keep these images private. When we refused to pay his extortion demands, he decided to make them public in the most damaging way possible. The reporter looked stunned, clearly realizing that her exclusive had just turned into something much more complicated. Ms. Washington, she said carefully, some viewers might question the appropriateness of a relationship between a billionaire and someone who works in his building. Some viewers, Amara said, leaning forward slightly, might want to examine why they're more concerned about 2 adults choosing to care about each other than they are about a man committing multiple felonies to try to profit from that relationship. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent years advocating for vulnerable people, someone who knew exactly how to frame an argument to expose the real issues at stake. The question isn't whether Darius and I come from different backgrounds, she continued. The question is whether Marcus Chin gets to decide who we're allowed to love and how much we have to pay him for that privilege. Mr. Cole, the reporter turned to Darius, how do you respond to suggestions that you've used your position to take advantage of women who work in your building? Darius's answer was calm, measured, and devastating. I'd respond by pointing out that Ms. Washington is the only person I've ever had a relationship with who works in my building, and that relationship began when she stood up to me, challenged me, and made it clear she wasn't intimidated by my wealth or position. The idea that she could be taken advantage of by anyone is insulting to her intelligence and strength. He turned to look directly at Amara, and the love in his expression was so clear, so genuine, that it was impossible to mistake for anything calculating or predatory. Ms. Washington saved my life, he said simply. She reminded me what it meant to be human, to care about something beyond money and success. The only person trying to exploit our relationship is Marcus Chun, who seems to think he can turn love into a commodity to be bought and sold. The reporter was clearly struggling now, her planned narrative crumbling in the face of their united front and the evidence of Marcus's criminal behavior. What do you want viewers to know? She asked finally. Amara and Darius exchanged a look, and in that moment, she could see that they were thinking the same thing. This was their chance to control the story, to show the world who they really were instead of letting others define them. We want viewers to know, Amara said, that love doesn't ask permission from society before it chooses where to land. That 2 people from different worlds can find common ground in shared values, mutual respect, and genuine caring. And that when someone tries to destroy that with threats and lies, we're not going to hide in shame, we're going to fight back. We want them to know, Darius added, that Marcus Chun is a criminal who's been harassing and stalking us for weeks, and that his allegations are nothing more than a desperate attempt to avoid facing justice for his crimes. The interview continued for another few minutes, but the damage to Marcus's credibility was already complete. By the time they left the studio, social media was exploding with support for their relationship and outrage at Marcus's behavior. The hashtag #LoveWins was trending nationally, and the photographs that were supposed to destroy them were instead being shared as examples of genuine affection in a world full of manufactured drama. But the real victory came 6 hours later, when Detective Santos called with an update. "We got him," she said without preamble. "Chun tried to board a flight to the Cayman Islands at O'Hare. Apparently, your television appearance spooked him enough that he decided to cut and run after all." "Is he talking?" Darius asked. "Like a canary. Trying to negotiate a plea deal by claiming he was just trying to protect you from making a mistake. His lawyers already suggesting diminished capacity due to stress from his own financial problems." Amara snorted. The stress of being a career criminal finally catching up with him. "Pretty much. Look, the charges are solid, the evidence is overwhelming, and his own television appearance gave us even more ammunition. He's not getting out of this." After Detective Santos hung up, Darius and Amara sat in the quiet of his office. The same office where this had all begun, where they'd first found each other across the vast divide of their different worlds. "So what now?" he asked, echoing the question from that first night when everything had seemed impossible and they decided to try anyway. "Now," Amara said, moving to the windows where Chicago spread out beneath them like a promise, "we live our lives. We love each other. We face whatever comes next together. The media attention won't die down immediately," he warned. "There'll be more interviews, more questions, more people wanting to know our story. Then we'll tell our story," she said simply. "Not Marcus's version, not the media's version. Our version. The true version." She turned to face him, and in her expression was everything he'd been too afraid to hope for: love, commitment, the absolute certainty that they were worth fighting for. "I have a question," she said. "What's that?" "When this all dies down, when the reporters move on to the next story and Marcus Chun is in prison where he belongs, what do you want our life to look like?" It was a question he'd been afraid to answer, even to himself. But looking at her, seeing the future stretching out ahead of them bright with possibility, he found the courage to name his deepest hopes. "I want Sunday dinners with your siblings," he said. "I want to teach Jamal about business and watch Kenya dance and help Tanya with college applications. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build something real and lasting and beautiful with you." "That sounds," Amara said, stepping closer, "absolutely perfect." When he kissed her this time, it wasn't like their first kiss, desperate and uncertain, shadowed by the fear that it might be their last. This kiss was a promise, a commitment, a declaration that they had fought for each other and won. Outside the windows, Chicago glittered in the evening light, full of millions of people living their lives, making their choices, taking their chances on love. And 42 floors above it all, two people who had found each other against all odds were finally free to build the future they'd been brave enough to fight for. The climax had arrived and passed. The battle had been fought and won. And love, messy, complicated, absolutely worth fighting for, had proven once again that it could conquer anything when wielded by people brave enough to trust in its power. Marcus Chun would face justice. The media would move on to other stories. But Darius Cole and Amara Washington would continue to love each other with the fierce certainty of people who knew exactly what that love was worth. The war was over. Love had won. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy, it's refusing to let them turn your love into something shameful. When you fight for what matters with truth and courage, even the strongest attacks become powerless. Tomorrow, we see what happens when two people who've survived the storm finally get to build the life they dreamed of together. 6 months later, the coal industry's boardroom had been transformed into something that would have been unimaginable a year earlier, a celebration of family, chosen and found. Amara stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Kenya's reflection in the glass as her sister practiced her audition piece for the Chicago Youth Ballet's summer intensive program. The 12-year-old's movements were fluid poetry, each gesture speaking of dreams that were no longer impossible but inevitable. "She's incredible," Darius said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee and the comfortable ease that had replaced their early nervous electricity. The program director called this morning. "They're not just accepting her, they're offering her a full scholarship." The smile that spread across Amara's face was pure sunshine. In the months since Marcus's arrest and conviction, watching her siblings flourish had become her greatest joy. Kenya's talent was finally being nurtured by professionals who recognized her gifts. Jamal had launched a successful freelance web design business with Darius's mentorship, earning enough to start his own college fund. And Tanya, brilliant, fierce Tanya, had been accepted to Northwestern University with a full scholarship to study criminal justice. "Speaking of the program," Amara said, turning to face him, the director also mentioned they're looking for a major sponsor for their community outreach initiative. Something about bringing dance education to underserved neighborhoods. Darius raised an eyebrow. "And you think coal industries might be interested in supporting that kind of program?" "I think," she said, reaching up to straighten his tie with the casual intimacy of someone who'd earned the right to such gestures, "that a certain billionaire I know has discovered he has strong opinions about making opportunities accessible to kids who might not otherwise have them." The transformation in Darius over the past 6 months had been remarkable to witness. The guarded, isolated man she'd first met in his pristine office had evolved into someone who actively sought ways to use his resources for meaningful impact. The Cole Foundation, established 3 months earlier, already supported literacy programs, job training initiatives, and college scholarships throughout Chicago's South Side. "You know me too well," he admitted, pulling her closer. "Though I have to ask, does this sudden interest in arts education have anything to do with a certain advocate who's been whispering in my ear about the importance of creative expression in childhood development?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," Amara said innocently, even as her eyes sparkled with mischief. Their relationship had settled into something that felt both extraordinary and completely natural. The media attention had faded, as Amara had predicted, replaced by other stories and newer scandals. What remained was the solid foundation they'd built, trust earned through crisis, love deepened by choosing each other again and again, and the daily joy of building a life that honored both their individual strengths and their shared values. 5 minutes until dinner. Tanya called from the kitchen area of what had become known as the family floor, the 41st floor that Darius had converted into a comfortable living space where Amara and her siblings could gather without the formality of his penthouse. "Did she just give us a time warning in our own space?" Darius asked, amused. "Your space," Amara corrected automatically, though the correction had lost most of its force over the months. The question of where she and Darius lived, her apartment, his penthouse, or the neutral ground of the family floor, had become fluid, practical rather than symbolic. "Our space," he corrected firmly. "All of it. Always." The casual certainty in his voice made her heart skip, as it still did when he demonstrated in small ways that he'd fully committed to their unconventional life. There had been no grand gestures, no dramatic proposals. Just the steady accumulation of choices that prioritized their relationship and her siblings' well-being above convenience or convention. "Besides," he continued, "Tanya's basically running the Cole Foundation scholarship program. I'm pretty sure she has more authority in this building than I do." It was true. Tanya had started as a volunteer, helping review applications and coordinate interviews. Within weeks, she'd reorganized their entire evaluation process, implemented a mentorship component, and created a tracking system that allowed them to follow scholarship recipients throughout their college careers. The foundation's other staff had started referring to her as the boss, with only half-joking respect. "She gets that from you," Darius had told Amara more than once. "That ability to see what needs to be done and then make it happen, regardless of obstacles." Family dinner is served. Jamal announced from the dining area, where he'd set the table with the kind of precision that spoke to his appreciation for systems and order. At 16, he'd grown 3 inches and gained the confidence that came from having his talents recognized and developed. His web design business was thriving, and he'd already been accepted to MIT's early admission program. "What's the occasion?" Amara asked as they joined her siblings around the table laden with takeout from their favorite Ethiopian restaurant. Family dinners had become a sacred tradition, but they were usually more casual affairs. "We have news," Kenya announced, practically bouncing in her chair. "All of us. We planned it." Amara looked around the table at her siblings' expectant faces, noting the way they kept glancing at Darius with barely contained excitement. Whatever this was, he was clearly in on it. "Tanya first," Jamal said, nudging his older sister. Tanya straightened, assuming the posture she'd perfected for scholarship interviews and foundation presentations. "Northwestern called today. They're not just giving me the full scholarship, they want me to join a special program for first-generation college students who are interested in law and public policy. It includes summer internships with the state attorney's office and guaranteed law school preparation." Amara felt tears spring to her eyes. Tanya's dreams of becoming a prosecutor, of fighting for justice the way she'd fought for their family, were no longer distant hopes but concrete possibilities. "Tanya, that's incredible." "Wait, there's more," Kenya interrupted. Jamal's turn. Jamal grinned, pulling out his phone to show her a screenshot of an email. "MIT wants me to start this fall instead of waiting until next year. Full scholarship, work-study program, and they've already connected me with a startup incubator that's interested in my app ideas." The app in question was something he developed to help low-income families navigate social services, a project born from their own experiences that had caught the attention of both MIT's admissions office and several venture capital firms. "And," Kenya said, unable to contain herself any longer, "the youth ballet program wants me to spend next summer at their intensive in New York, but they also want me to help them develop a program here in Chicago for kids who can't afford regular dance classes." Amara stared at her siblings, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their achievements and the realization that all their childhood dreams were not only possible but actively being supported by institutions that recognized their worth. "I'm so proud of all of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've worked so hard, and you deserve everything that's happening." "Actually," Tanya said, exchanging a meaningful look with her younger siblings, "we deserve it because of everything you sacrificed for us. Because you believed in us even when we didn't believe in ourselves. Because you showed us that we were worth fighting for." "Which brings us," Jamal added, "to our real news." Kenya reached under the table and pulled out a wrapped package, placing it carefully in front of Amara. "This is from all of us. Including Darius, because he's family now whether you want to admit it or not." Amara looked at Darius, who was watching her with an expression of nervous anticipation that suggested whatever was in the package was significant beyond a simple gift. Inside the wrapping was a photo album, not just any album, but a beautiful leather-bound book filled with pictures that chronicled their journey from that first family dinner 6 months ago through dozens of small moments she'd barely noticed were being captured. Darius teaching Jamal to tie a tie. Kenya showing off her ballet positions in his office. Tanya presenting her ideas to the foundation board. All of them together, laughing and arguing and simply existing as the family they'd somehow become. But it was the final page that made her gasp. A photograph of all 5 of them at the Chicago lakefront, taken just weeks earlier during a spontaneous picnic. They looked happy, relaxed, genuinely connected, not like a billionaire and a cleaning woman who'd somehow stumbled into love, but like people who belonged together. Like a family. Beneath the photo, in Tanya's careful handwriting, was a simple message. For Amara, who taught us that love isn't about where you come from, it's about where you choose to go together. "There's more," Darius said quietly, and Amara realized his hand was shaking slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. The small velvet box he placed on the table made her heart stop entirely. "I know this isn't traditional," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves she could see in his eyes. "I know we've done everything backwards and unconventionally from the beginning. But your siblings thought, we all thought, that maybe it was time to make it official." He opened the box to reveal not the massive diamond she might have expected, but something far more meaningful, a simple, elegant ring set with her birthstone, surrounded by smaller stones representing each of her siblings' birth months. "The question isn't whether I love you," he continued, looking directly into her eyes. "We've already established that. The question is whether you're willing to build a life that includes all of us, your siblings, my chaotic schedule, the foundation work, the media attention that still crops up occasionally, and whatever other adventures we find ourselves taking on together. The question," Tanya added with a grin, "is whether you're ready to make this poor man's suffering official, because honestly, watching him try to figure out how to propose for the past month has been painful for all of us." Amara laughed through her tears, looking around the table at the faces of the people who become her chosen family in the most unexpected way possible. Kenya bouncing with excitement. Jamal trying to look sophisticated but failing to hide his grin. Tanya radiating the satisfaction of someone who'd helped orchestrate something perfect. And Darius, watching her with an expression that held everything: love, hope, the promise of a future they'd build together one choice at a time. "Yes," she said, not needing to think about it because the answer had been building in her heart for months. "Yes, to all of it. To the chaos and the adventures and the unconventional family dinners and whatever comes next." The ring fit perfectly, of course, because Darius had apparently enlisted Tanya's help to figure out her size along with everything else. As he slipped it onto her finger, Amara felt the final piece of her new life click into place. "So," Kenya said as they admired the ring and passed around hugs and congratulations, "when's the wedding? Because I have some ideas about the music, and Jamal wants to design the website, and Tanya thinks we should have it at the Foundation Gala venue." "Slow down," Amara laughed, but she was already imagining it, a celebration that honored both the family she'd built through years of sacrifice and the love she'd found when she'd finally been brave enough to believe she deserved it. Later, after her siblings had gone home and the dishes were cleaned and put away, Amara and Darius stood once again at the windows overlooking Chicago. The city sparkled beneath them, full of possibilities and stories and other people taking chances on love. "Any regrets?" he asked, pulling her close. "About which part?" "Falling in love with my client, facing down a blackmailer on live television, or agreeing to marry someone who thinks a proper proposal requires a committee." "Any of it. All of it." She considered the question seriously, thinking about the woman she'd been a year ago, exhausted, isolated, convinced that happiness was a luxury she couldn't afford. Then she thought about the woman she was now, engaged to a man who loved not just her but her entire chaotic, wonderful family, surrounded by possibilities she'd never dared to dream. "Not one," she said finally. "Not a single one. Even though it means dealing with my board of directors questioning why I'm spending company money on dance scholarships and literacy programs. Even though it means dealing with my siblings having opinions about everything from our wedding venue to your terrible habit of working through dinner. Especially because of that," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I spent 5 years thinking I had to choose between professional success and personal happiness. You taught me that the choice was never real, that the best life is one where love makes you braver, not smaller." Outside their window, Chicago hummed with late-night energy. Somewhere in the city, other people were falling in love, taking chances, choosing to believe in possibilities that seemed impossible. Other families were gathering around dinner tables. Other dreamers were working toward goals that felt too big for their circumstances. And 42 floors above it all, two people who'd found each other across every conceivable divide were planning a future that honored both where they'd come from and where they were brave enough to go together. The resolution was complete, the story told, the happy ending earned through courage and choice and the radical belief that love, real love, was always worth fighting for. In the morning, there would be wedding plans to make and foundation work to coordinate and the daily business of building a life that included both billion-dollar board meetings and teenage dance recitals. There would be challenges and complications and the 1,000 small choices that turn love into a lifetime. But tonight, there was just this, Two hearts that had found their home in each other, surrounded by a family that proved love could create bonds stronger than blood. In a city full of possibilities they were finally brave enough to claim. The story was complete. Love had won. And the best part, the part where they actually got to live happily ever after, was just beginning. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't about finding someone who completes you. They're about finding someone who makes you brave enough to become who you were always meant to be. When love builds its forever, it does so one choice at a time, one challenge overcome, one moment of choosing each other again and again until the impossible becomes inevitable and the dream becomes simply life.